Good afternoon. My name is Tiffany and today's presentation is aimed to educate you about 8 major topics about health and nutrition status for different populations in society. So we'll be looking at body fatness and fertility, high-risk pregnancies and iodine, epigenetics, breastfeeding in Australia, school nutrition and childhood obesity, adolescent health and health risk behaviours, overweight and obesity in regards to body image and health, and caloric restrictions. So let's look at body fatness and fertility first. So according to research, over half of the reproductive women in the United States are either overweight or obese. So this increase in the number of pregnant women who are overweight or obese increases the risk of developing preeclampsia and gestational diabetes. And there's also a more likelihood of stillbirths occurring. And there's also a higher risk for their children to develop chronic diseases like diabetes. So one of my friends fell pregnant early at the start of this year. It was unplanned and she's obese. And I am happy for her. And at the time I didn't really think, about her weight and falling pregnant. But now after reading this research, I am very concerned for her health and also her baby's health, because she's increased her risk of developing diabetes and preeclampsia and also diabetes for her future child. So I'm very concerned for her. So high-risk pregnancies. As I said before, with pregnant women, there is an increase in obesity. So according to research, 43% of pregnant women are known to be overweight or obese. And so with this weight status comes a more likely effect of having preterm births. And there's also more complications with blood pressure and insulin resistance. And a reason why there could be increases in the weight status of pregnant women could be brought down to poor knowledge about weight gain and what's appropriate when you're pregnant, and also what is adequate nutrition during pregnancy. So this really concerns me that there's nearly half of maternal women who are overweight or obese. I'm not a mother yet, but I would imagine that mothers these days will be doing all that they can to educate themselves before they fall pregnant. I know for me, one of my personal goals is to be healthy before falling pregnant, because I want my child to be healthy and I too want to have a quick recovery after having a baby. So next we're talking about iodine. Iodine is essential during pregnancy because it helps the thyroid gland to synthesize hormones needed for natural brain and nervous system development. For maternal women, consuming the right amount of iodine is so important. So the recommended guidelines at the moment for iodine intake is 220 micrograms. And when you're breastfeeding, it's 270 micrograms. However, the current intake that pregnant women are taking now is only 96 micrograms. So because the women are falling short of the recommended intake, there is a more likely chance of developing nervous system disabilities and also increasing the mortality of the child. So before researching this, I never understood the purpose of iodine until now, of course. And I'm very concerned for the next generation because there is a higher risk of disabilities and an even higher risk of death occurring because pregnant women aren't meeting the requirements. So we need to do everything in our power to make sure that children in the next generation have a healthy life. So now let's talk about epigenetics. Within the body, different cells can be taken and modified to another cell in the same environment, which is epigenetics. So basically this means that the DNA sequencing of the cells are the same, but they differ with the characteristics, the physical characteristics, so the phenotypes. So the best way to understand epigenetics is to look at identical twins. As twins age and they grow up and make their own decisions and changes in lifestyle factors, the decisions that they do can affect the sequencing of the cell. So let's look at a twin who smokes and another twin who is a non-smoker. So the twin who smokes, we're going to find changes in the lung cells because of the effects cigarette smoking has. And in a non-smoker, we're going to see a very healthy lung. So we can tell that the cells are different, but the DNA between the two twins are exactly the same. Okay, so now breastfeeding in Australia. So breastfeeding has so many benefits. It decreases the risk of infection and cancers, there's less hospital admissions, and there's better education and development results of the child as well. So currently the recommended breastfeeding guidelines says to breastfeed exclusively for the first 6 months, and after 6 months we can introduce solid foods while continuing to breastfeed for up to 2 years or even more than 2 years. But research is telling us that only 86% of women actually stop breastfeeding in the first few weeks. But it is known that in this group, they also have said that they wished they would have continued to breastfeed for longer. But in addition to this, we also know that, according to this research, that the health services aren't doing enough to help women in understanding what is the correct amount of breastfeeding the child needs and what's acceptable and what's normal. So what shocked me about this the most is that not enough mothers are receiving adequate support and guidance from the health system. They're turning to media and family and friends to find out what is normal. So there really is a need for the government to put more into breastfeeding information and to allow the pregnant women to have more access to this. So school nutrition. So in the last 20 years, child overweight and obesity has skyrocketed. There's now an increase in excess fat in children, and because of this there is hypertension, insulin resistance, liver complication, and so much more later in life. According to the World Health Association, they've even said it's becoming more severe than ever. So in my opinion, when I was at primary school, I rarely got to eat tuck shop or eat unhealthy for that matter. It was something my parents didn't want me to do, and I didn't want to get in the habit of it either. When I got into high school, I still didn't buy tuck shop even though I knew I had more independence and freedom to have it. I think because of the influence my parents had on me when I was in primary school, that followed me through when I was in high school. So now we'll talk about adolescent health and health risk behaviours. Obesity can be a result of adjustable and unmodifiable factors. So adjustable factors are what you eat, your lifestyle, and your physical activity. And your unmodifiable factors are your genetics. So your nutritional intake and sedentary lifestyle can easily be modified to improve quality of life. So according to research, there's a common trend found where good and healthy eating habits start in primary school, but when they reach the teenage years, these healthy habits stop. So I believe that this change could be factored down to the social and lifestyle factors in that child's life. For me personally, I experienced changes in my eating behaviour when I transitioned from primary school into high school. I went from eating healthy to eating unhealthy foods, mostly on the weekends. But I believe that being in a socializing environment and being more independent definitely impacted my choices in food that I ate when I was in high school. So I believe that parents educating their children in primary school is so important. Kids need to know the consequences of eating something unhealthy and the benefits of eating something healthy. I reckon if I had known more about the consequences when I was in primary school, I reckon my eating patterns would have been a lot different when I reached adolescence. Alright, so now let's look at overweight and obesity in terms of body image and health. So the way I looked at this is I divided it into two perspectives, a national and personal perspective. So looking at overweight and obesity nationally, Australia has become the fattest nation. So we are actually 1% higher in obese adults than America. So there is a huge need to classify this as a health status nationally. And we know that the government understands this because we can see that they're putting in millions and millions of dollars in funding for health and physical activity advertisements. So nationally, overweight and obesity is a health issue. But now looking at it personally, this article that I read from Cliff and Wright in 2010 looked at models and also looked at the judges' criticism that they gave to the models. And a lot of them said that these models were bottom heavy, sending the wrong message and telling women that are nearly on the verge of being underweight that they're putting on too much weight. So personally, I believe that it's such an awesome thing that Australia and our government is promoting health and physical activity, because there's a lot of people out there that actually don't suffer from body image issues and just need that motivation or encouragement to participate in activity and to eat healthy. But there are people who do struggle with their body image, and I think it's important that before they start to lose weight, they need to find out where they fit in society, just to have that stable peace of mind, to surround themselves with people who encourage them about how beautiful they look, and to also remind them not to fall for the lies that the media so intrusively advertises about the perfect model body and things like that. So looking at it nationally, obesity and overweight is definitely a health issue, but when you look at it personally, it becomes a body image issue. And finally, we're looking at caloric restrictions. So there's been quite a few positive remarks that it lowers mortality and decreases the risk of disease when you reduce your calories in your diet, but negative effects have also been seen. We've noticed that there's decreases in bone density, which causes osteoporosis. There's reduced strength and stamina, and for females, our menstrual cycles become irregular, and there's also decreases in blood pressure. So personally, I don't think it's worth reducing your calorie restrictions to the point where you're seeing these negative side effects, even though there's positive effects coming from reducing your calories. Such as diets like the Aquan diet, where we can see that there's a decrease in heart disease as well as cancer, which is fantastic. But I still reckon that having a healthy and nutrition diet and with the additional supplement of exercise is just as effective. So that's just my opinion about the calorie restrictions. So just to summarize this presentation, there is over half of the women in the United States who are overweight or obese, and 43% of maternal women are also overweight and obese. And in these pregnant women, the iodine intake recommendations aren't being met, which increases the risk of disabilities and mortality in children. And looking at epigenetics, we found that lifestyle factors like smoking can change the physical characteristics of our cells in our body. And breastfeeding mothers have also spoken out to tell us that they're not receiving enough adequate information from the health services, and therefore going to family members and looking on social websites, social medias about what's normal and what's adequate with breastfeeding. We also know that obese children are at a high risk of developing diseases, and that eating behaviours change when children transition from primary school into high school. And we also have found that when looking at overweight and obesity, looking nationally, obesity is a health issue, and looking personally, it becomes a body image issue. And finally, caloric restrictions have demonstrated positive and negative effects on the human body. So thank you for listening to this presentation, and I hope that you learned something today.